one more minute. Councilor Crossley, you want to text President Albright, see if she's available?
Are we able to at least start like discussing the memo or anything like that? Or it looks like she's logging on. Okay.
Okay. So with that, we will commence our operations here. All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to a special meeting of Programs and Services. It is Thursday, November 30th, with an 8 p.m. start time. So thank you all for staying up. At the start of the meeting, we are joined by, from Ward 1, Councilor Maria Greenberg. From Ward 2, President Albright. I am Josh Krinsman, Councilor at Large from Ward 4, Chair of the Committee. From Ward 5, Councilor Bill Humphrey. From Ward 7, Councilor Lyle Baker. Other councilors with us are Councilor John Oliver, Councilor Julian Malachy, Councilor Deb Crossley, Councilor Emily Norton, and Councilor Allison Leary. I believe we also have the Chief Operating Officer of the city, Jonathan Yo, and from the Law Department is Jennifer Wilson. Did I miss anyone? And Deputy Commissioner Welch of Parks, Recreation, and Culture. All right, so we have 2 items before us, as usual. Let me read them into the record. Item 411-22, a request for amendment to Chapter 21, Article 3, Trees to extend tree protection and update permits. And Article 412-22, a request for review and amendments to Chapter 21, Article 3, Division 3. Where we left off, we felt we had made all of our substantive decisions. We needed the Law Department to review that and draft the ordinance for us. The Law Department had also asked for an opportunity to clean up the ordinance, which had some lingering drafting issues. And so we provided the Law Department that opportunity. We got together to review to make sure that the Law Department had drafted it appropriately. There were some questions. Councilors Norton and Malachy, who originally filed one of the items, wanted an opportunity to go over that draft with the Law Department. We adjourned, we held the item, we adjourned so that we could give them that opportunity. They took that opportunity. What we now have is a redrafted ordinance, and we have a memo from the Law Department that outlines essentially the outcome of that conversation. And it is now up to the committee to sort of go through that. I think the memo from the Law Department actually lays out a nice structure, and I think the committee should go through both the decisions that were made in that meeting, make sure we agree with those decisions, and then there are a couple of questions that Councilors Norton and Malachy and Wright would like addressed as well. And so I want to pose those to the committee to see if the committee would like to address those. Does that sound like a workable plan to everyone? Have I missed anything? And does that comport with everyone's understanding of how we should proceed tonight? Okay, I'm seeing nods. I'm hearing no objections. So I'm going to assume everyone understood that we're going forward. I believe Councilor Wright has joined us. Councilor Wright, if you're here, I thought I saw you join. Welcome.
Yep. Hi.
There you go. Okay, so why don't we just, if folks can pull up the memo. Actually, Jacqueline, do you want to pull up the memo on the shared screen so everyone can see what we're looking at? And for the viewers at home, I know we're all at home, but you know what I mean? They can see what we're looking at. They can see the memo that we're working off of as well. Hopefully committee members also have the draft ordinance in front of them so that you can be looking at the language. Okay, so if you can scroll down to the changes that were made. So again, these changes that were made reflect things that came about in that discussion. I don't want to speak to exactly why that was. I think in different instances, it was different things. It may have intended to be in there or wasn't clear. And I think it was very helpful of the councilors to go through that. And the Law Department made some of these modifications. So like I said, right off the bat, they added a new paragraph to the intent and purposes. Did folks see that? Does anyone have any questions about that, concerns about that? Does anyone want to modify that, change that? Is everyone happy with that? And sort of assuming that we have unanimous consent, we can just plow through these. slash, okay, I see no hands. I'm assuming that means everyone's okay with that intent section. Okay. The removal of the duplicative language from the definitions of landmark tree and legacy tree. Everyone okay with that? No comments from anyone? Okay. I just have to pull one document here. I apologize. Okay. Okay. The next thing is that language was added to the definition of exempt tree to clarify that the classification only applied when the applicant is seeking to remove a tree on the lot that meets the definition of exempt tree. I actually thought this was unnecessary. Ms. Wilson, I don't know, maybe you can speak to this. I felt like 2182C and 2185D addressed this already, and it felt weird to put it in the definition, which I feel like is the definition of exempt tree, not necessarily a place where you put what we're doing with that definition.
I would agree. We put this in just after speaking with counselors Norton, Maliki, and Wright. They had thought that they wanted it to be clearer up front and to include it in the definition section. I also don't think it is necessary, but if the committee wants to have it in, I don't have a strong preference against it.
Okay. So my sense was that the ordinance does this. Again, 2182C and 2185D do this, but whatever the committee wants to do. So great. We have some hands and we have participation. Yay. Councillor Crossley.
Thank you. So obviously I'm not on the committee and I'm normally not able to attend. And so I haven't been able to say anything and I'm not sure where what I want to say is appropriate. But I thought I'd start with this definition of exempt tree and you might tell me to wait for some other section. My biggest concern is that you're not exempting invasive species as I understand it. And I think that's a huge mistake. It's a non-starter for me. Other tree ordinances in other communities like Wellesley are not only exempting invasive species, they're naming certain species and then allowing a tree warden or someone with expertise to identify additional species. What I heard, and I don't know if that belongs in the definition of exempt tree or if that's something you cover later. And I know it's not in the ordinance, but it's something that you would have to put in a later section. But that's very concerning to me. And the other thing I have a concern about, it doesn't belong in this section, so I'll raise it later.
Okay, I do know that the committee talked about that.
I heard that you did, and I heard that you had people protesting not exempting invasive species, of which we have several in Newton, which are very damaging in other ways. We have a proliferation of Norway maples, but there are others as well. So
well, let me go to President Albright is next, and I know that was an issue for her. President Albright, I don't know if you remember why the committee chose not to add the particularly invasive species into the ordinance or not. I can also go to Mr. Welch. Do you remember? Maybe I don't want to put you on either one of you on the spot. Does one of you remember why that discussion ended the way it did?
Well, I think from our perspective, the way, we weren't in favor of adding that language because we felt that there were opportunities for removal. It would allow for the removal of trees by claiming it was a benefit by removing the invasive, but at the same time, really just serving a separate purpose to remove a tree, where again, Norway maples provide lots of environmental benefits, more than some native trees. So the way we addressed the situation though, was if someone wished to remove a Norway maple for the betterment of a property or the betterment of the environment on that site, they could do so, they could ask to do so, and that we would review that. And if we determined that they presented the right type of information that allowed for that tree to come down, we would not require replacement if it was clear they were doing it with the intent to better the environment and not the intent to circumvent replacing trees.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
may I count, Chairman, I just want to say that makes no sense whatsoever to me. it's always a betterment to the environment to remove a species that takes over native species, and in some cases toxifies them, and in almost all cases does not support the native wildlife that native trees do. And there's lots of study on that. So I'm not, I don't understand the rationale as it was just stated. Just really doesn't make sense. I'm aware that the city has a huge number of Norway maples. It was the tree of choice as an inexpensive tree in the 1950s and 60s and 70s. But it's a pretty big red flag that they're no longer sold. You're not allowed to even to sell them anymore for some time. And there's a list. There's a pretty good list. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Thank you. And I know we have plenty to get through from the committee perspective tonight, so maybe keep that for when we get to the floor of the council. Might be an opportunity. Want to welcome Councillor Kelly, who joined us as well. President Albright.
So I wanted to agree with you about the issue of the duplication in the definition of exempt tree. But I don't understand what the definition of exempt tree would be if you took away all that stuff. Would it be just a protected tree that a permit applicant seeks to remove that does not meet the legacy landmark or legacy tree designation? Is that all it would be if you took away all the other stuff that's repeated elsewhere?
If you're looking at the definition as drafted, I think it's on page 7 of the agenda.
Yeah.
There is a second sentence added that begins with "such trees may not be removed." That sentence doesn't need to be there, in my opinion.
Okay.
Because what that sentence does is two things, which are handled in 2182C and 2185D.
Well, it also repeats what's already said in the first sentence. If you read it carefully, the 24 months issue is repeated a second time in the same definition.
Well,
So-
I mean, the second sentence also says what happens if construction occurs within 24 months.
Yeah. So,
But again, that's handled later. So,
I'm just agreeing with you.
okay. Listen, anyone who agrees with me, please feel free to at any time raise your hand and make that known. That's always encouraged in this committee.
Okay, good.
Councillor Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the issue here, I think, is that we were concerned that when Ms. Wilson and I'm forgetting Jonah's last name. Anyway,
Temple.
Thank you. It's late after another late night. When they made the change to having exempt trees rather than exempt lots, and we had some back and forth on that. And so then we tried to, well, the issue I had was that someone reading this quickly and as they are going about trying to do a project or whatever, that you could think an exempt tree, then I don't have to do something. So the idea was just to make it very, very clear. However, then we did also talk in our meeting, which I really, again, want to express my gratitude to the law department and to Mr. Yo for taking the time, that there will be a accompanying manual or whatever you'd call
Right.
it, the way
Instructions or something.
the way we do
Yeah.
have the leaf blower ordinance. So I do appreciate that, but just, this was really just to make it very, very clear to people, because for folks who haven't had the opportunity to spend 20 hours in this committee going through this ordinance and are just reading it for the first time, that I think would be confusing. So I do think it makes sense to leave it in. Not going to follow my sword for that. Regarding the invasive tree issue, I just do want to comment that we've been over that, and we have been, I think, reasonably deferring to our tree warden. So I would encourage us to keep doing it in terms of, what's environmentally beneficial or not, and let him be the determinant of that. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Baker.
Councillor Norton said what I wanted to say.
Best comment of the night so far, Councillor Baker. Nailed it. Councillor Humphrey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Narrowly on this particular point, although I can see the argument that it's potentially redundant, I did understand why it was being suggested to be in there, just for clarity of reading, especially because we want an ordinance that's going to be understandable, especially with regard to the exemptions to the ordinary homeowner and resident, as opposed to like a land use attorney or a, you know, developer who's reading the code. So I think I don't personally mind if it stays in this section. I think it could be helpful to people. To the other issue that had been raised, you know, I know Councillor Crossley hasn't been able to be here for all of the many debates, and that's true for many of our colleagues as well. The committee is certainly very aware of the issue regarding invasives and natives and so forth. And we've had a lot of discussion about it. And it wasn't that we necessarily decided like that should never be addressed at any point. But I think the conclusion that we ultimately came to was that we weren't prepared to come up with something that could be reasonably agreed upon in this particular term, in this particular round of reforms. I think it's going to have to come back for future review. And one of the discussions that we had, just to give an example, was, yes, we can probably agree generically that invasives are bad and have environmental consequences and so forth, but how are we defining that? How are we defining native trees? Should there be a native tree planting requirement as part of the replacement requirements? Like, once you actually start getting into the details of it, then we run into the problem of how we're, you know, what is the definition we can all agree on here? Should that definition account for changing climates and things like that, that some of the things that were not previously native may soon become native, but not necessarily for invasive reasons per se. So I completely understand the issue here, and I would like us to go back in a future term and add something addressing that point. I just don't think that realistically we are going to be able to get it done in this round of reforms in this term and come up with something that can get a reasonably broad agreement. And I understand that might be frustrating. There are some options for the tree warden to give some waivers, but also to that broader point regarding whether or not it should be exempt, in a lot of cases, if not most cases, it would be exempt anyway, right? I mean, no, it wouldn't be exempt if a developer who owns a property where there's no resident living on it wants to clear cut all of the Norway maples. Yeah, they're probably going to have to follow the procedure here for paying into the replacement fund. And actually, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. An ordinary homeowner who's not doing construction at a single family home, for example, they're exempt for other reasons. So I don't think this is an enormous concern. And I don't think it should be, you know, considered to be a non-starter on this point. I would very much like us to come back and work on just this particular point in a future term. I understand people might be kind of exhausted at dealing with the tree ordinance at this point, but I do think it warrants a debate. But I think we should have a broad debate with a lot of research and discussions with experts, et cetera, on just that specific point. And we need to get something done this term on all the work that we've been doing on the other points. And I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you. In the interest of getting something done this term, I'm just going to ask that we remove that second sentence of the definition, call for a quick vote. If it fails, we'll leave it in and we'll move on to the next thing. Okay. Can councilors raise their hand? Okay. I propose that we remove the sentence. Those in favor of removing the sentence, raise your hand, please. Three of us. Okay. Lower them, please. Thank you. Those not in favor of removing the sentence from the definition. 3 to 2. 3 to 2. Okay, so we'll remove that sentence. On to the next thing. Again, I think no one believes it changes the content at all. It's just really a drafting thing. Okay, the next item on the memorandum is that the updated draft removed the tree warden's ability to waive the required contents of the tree permit application. Does anyone have a concern with that? I think it made sense, especially the reasoning. And again, Mr. Temple, thank you for laying this out so clearly. It was very helpful for us as a committee. Councilor Baker, is your hand up to speak on this, or just a remnant?
No, it isn't. I'm John Lord. I'm just trying to read the document. Sorry.
Okay, no worries.
Chair, if I can just chime in briefly on this one. I
Sure.
think our tree warden may have had one comment or concern about us taking that out. Mark, I don't know if that's something you still want to speak to here.
All right, so this is the one where we were talking about, let me make sure I have it correct here.
There had been a sentence that allowed the commissioner to waive the requirements of the tree permit application. The reasoning here, I believe, was that the new structure separated into the required contents and supplementary content components of the application. And so there was no discretion necessary for required components.
Yeah, so Mike, there is the concern there is the extent at which it's referencing that we would need the person, when we're requiring it, that they submit a tree plan. And I think the concept for the majority of what we do, that's completely fine. And we would always ask for that. But there are cases where it's not uncommon cases where it just doesn't seem feasible or realistic to need it. So for instance, if Brayburn Country Club, for instance, comes to us to remove dead trees on their property like they do every single year, by definition, currently, I must require from them a tree plan that must show all of the trees on the lot 5 inches in diameter and larger. It's 185 acres worth of trees. That would be an extremely challenging plan and seems a little unrealistic to need for the removal for a small project or for a small thing. So I guess my concern here is that by requiring it in every instance, there isn't, it's going to create a burden on people that isn't necessary. It would be better off if it were an option to require it. In most cases, we're going to require it. It's just there are instances where it's not necessary.
Well, I find that very helpful. Anyone else from the committee want to weigh on this before we take a vote on whether to add back in essentially that sentence? Let me draw your attention to it in the drafting. I believe it is section 2183 on page 9 of the agenda. It appears under subsection D. The tree warden may waive any of the above listed requirements upon written request from the applicant in the tree warden's sole discretion. Right, Mr. Temple, that's the sentence we're talking about?
That is correct.
Okay. Councilor Maliki.
Thank you. I guess I'd like to see this limited to the type of large, institutional plots or parcels that Mark Welch mentioned, and not create a situation where he's being pressured by, certain homeowners or whatever to waive requirements.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Humphrey.
Similarly there, well, and I'm not even sure necessarily if I agree with exempting the large property owners. I don't know if they've been asking for that. I hadn't heard anything to that effect. I understand it, I might be some more work for them, but I thought part of this was to get a better inventory of the private street trees in the city. The private trees, excuse me, not as opposed to the street trees. I think the sentence that was in there was incredibly broad. If we were to do something, I think it would need to be narrower than, sole discretion across all categories, et cetera, kind of like what Councilor Maliki just said. So, I don't know that we necessarily need to put this back in. I don't think it's creating more work for the staff, as far as I understand it.
Let me ask you a question, Councilor Humphrey, just in the interest of trying to find something here. Would something more narrow be allowing the commissioner to waive the requirement for a tree plan, or not, because that you think is the necessary component? Because I think the only one I heard Mr. Welch talk about was the requirement for a tree plan.
Yeah, and it's really the detail of the tree plan on my end.
And I would also add to that, one option could just be moving the tree plan to the additional contents and sticking with keeping out the language about the discretion to waive a requirement. That's an option too.
Yeah. I think if we're going to put some sort of thing in there, discretionary thing in there, then yeah, it would need to be narrower, more focused, et cetera, on this point, rather than, any of the requirements, sole discretion, no particular conditions, et cetera.
So would you be more comfortable, as Mr. Temple suggested, moving a tree plan into the additional contents? Just to get a sense of where you're at.
Probably, but I'd be interested
Okay.
to hear what the other people have to say
Yep.
who've raised their hands.
Understood. Counselor Wright, I have you next.
I wouldn't want to put it in the optional items. I mean, that was the reason why, is to have all this information. But to get back to it, I mean, the country club, yes, it's a lot of work to organize or their trees onto a tree plan. But once it's done, it'll be very easy to update it. And this is great data that we need. And so I don't support moving it down and yeah.
Or adding the discretion back in. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Counselor Baker?
I would leave it alone too.
Okay. President Albright?
Thank you. Sorry, I couldn't get to the unmute. I trust the tree warden to know what he wants to waive and what he doesn't want to waive, so I'm fine with putting it back in.
Okay. Counselor Greenberg?
I agree with President Albright.
Okay. Counselor Maliki, is your hand back up?
Yes, I agree with Counselor Wright, and I would not want to see it move to discretionary. We want people to assume it's a requirement, not assume it's something that maybe they probably won't have to do. And as Counselor Wright said, once an organization like Rayburn has a tree plan, which they probably already have, they only need to update it year to year. They don't need to do it from scratch. Thank you.
Okay. Let's vote. First, let's talk about waiving the discretion back in. If that fails, I'll talk about moving tree plan into the additional contents. If there's a third option after that, folks can let me know. Those committee members in favor of adding the sentence back in that provides the tree warden with the discretion to waive components of the application, raise your hand.
Oh, sorry. So what, I'm sorry, what are we voting on?
Adding the sentence about providing the tree warden with discretion back in where it has currently been struck. Okay, that's 3. Those opposed to adding the sentence back in, allowing the tree warden to waive components of the application. 3. So it doesn't pass. And for the moment, we'll leave the sentence out. The second option was to take the requirement of a tree plan and move that down into the additional contents, so that one item, there would be some discretion around that. Members of the committee in favor of relocating the requirement for a tree plan as part of the application into the additional contents section, please raise your hand. Councilor Baker, is your hand up for this intentionally? I feel like it wasn't,
Sorry.
to be fair to you. Councilor Humphrey, this was what I thought you were in favor of. Do you want to raise your hand for this?
No, I said I was open to it, but
Okay,
it wasn't really
okay.
my preference.
Again, not trying to sway you, just want to make sure you heard what was going on.
Yeah.
I'm going quickly here. Okay, 3 in favor. Those opposed to relocating tree plan down into the additional contents section. 3. Okay, so that doesn't pass either. At the moment, we're going to make no changes to this section, and it is going to remain non-discretionary, all of the requirements. Anyway, Councilor Baker, do you have a comment?
No, I've just got to keep watching my hand. It's the electronic.
You're
I'm
just
so
voting in
used to
support of
this
everything that I'm
situation.
saying. I appreciate that. Okay, so unless anyone has anything else to say, we'll move on to the next item. Okay, so we will leave that as it is drafted, and as a committee, we'll make no changes. The change from street to right away, I think everyone remembers this was in line with exactly what the committee had decided. I think that was pretty clear. Councilor Ryan had raised this. Anyone have any concerns with that next bullet point and the draft changes that were made? Now, okay. The additional language to clarify when a tree protection plan will be required to be submitted with a tree permit application. That's 2183 A2A. The text is when work is being done within the tree save area of a protected tree on the applicant's property or an abutting lot. Everyone okay with that? Okay. So no objections. I'll keep moving on. clarifying the submission of a statement by the certified arborist when there are proposed grade changes, which applies both to trees on the applicant's lot and abutting lots. Everyone okay with those changes? 2183 AD2. Okay. 2183B, the change removing the tree warden's ability to waive the required content of the exemption permit. Mr. Welch, you want to weigh in on that one? You okay with that one?
Yeah, no, we're okay with that one.
Okay. Can't imagine anyone else has a problem with that, right? Okay, moving right along. Hey, we're doing it, committee. We're doing it. The low income exemption, 2183C3. Again, this was something that we, as a committee, had talked about. We had asked the law department to draft. I think Mr. Temple worked off of existing exemption guidelines, right, Mr. Temple?
That is correct.
Which was a great idea. Thank you for coming up with that. That was good. Anyone have any problems with that? Councilor Baker.
Well, I just want to be clear. There was a sentence that said create a new low-income exemption from the application fee. I agree that that's fine. I'm not eager to go broader than that in the application fee, because again, this is a situation where the purpose of the ordinance seemed to be served broadly, and the application part I'm certainly in favor of, but I'm not confident I'm in favor of the other expansion of the other exemptions. Excuse me.
Which other exemption are you referring to? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I thought it said in the law, the law department, the committee said should decide whether the exemption applies only to the application or applies more broadly to the exemption replacement requirement, right?
I see.
I'm not ready to go far in the application fee itself at the moment. I'm open to persuasion, but that's where I am.
Okay. And let's discuss that. You're right to discuss that. Mr. Temple, I was going to ask why it says section as opposed to subsection in the draft. Is that essentially how we would make the change about what this applies to?
Yeah, I mean, really, this is more of a placeholder language. Depending on how the committee wants to apply it, we may consider drafting it in a different way. The only other thing I will add, and Jen may have said this in the beginning, sorry, I was a little late getting here, but I'm not sure the law department is necessarily in favor of this from an ordinance drafting perspective. It's extremely rare to have any type of waiver, low income waiver provision from an ordinance requirement. I think we do it for water and sewer because there's a necessity for water. But that reasoning doesn't necessarily apply to trees. It doesn't mean the committee can't do it, but I just ask you to consider it carefully.
Yep. Councilor Humphrey.
Thank you. Continuing from the point that Councilor Baker, I think, was bringing up. So as we had discussed previously in a different, an earlier meeting on this, it's going to be kind of an edge case scenario where a low income exemption would even be relevant. I think it makes some amount of sense to potentially waive the application fee process so they can figure out if they are in fact exempt for other reasons, rather than because there aren't going to be that many scenarios where somebody is not able to afford this but also not exempt for some other reason. So I think it's just a question of needing to waive the permit fee. That was my recollection of the discussion that we had previously on this. So I don't know that it necessarily needs to go beyond that, but I'm open to hearing otherwise.
So I think what I heard you say is sort of agreement with Councilor Baker that this should apply to the application fee.
Right. That if we're going to have an income related exemption, it's just about the application fee because they're going to be exempt for other reasons, probably in 99 times out of 100 or 999 times out of 1,000. So yeah.
President Albright.
I'm not sure. Well, So first of all, there is no exemption fee yet. So let's not assume that there is going to be one. The second thing is, I don't understand that whole discussion about it's an edge case. So the deferral goes up to, what is it, 86,000? It's higher than that now, isn't it? What is the deferral? Does anybody remember the number? It's
The tax deferral program?
Yeah, the tax deferral. I think that's what this is using as the standard.
It's one of them.
I don't know, it goes up to 90,000. I don't know what it goes up to anyway. So somebody who has an income of 86,000 and wants to remove a tree, why is that an edge case?
So may I respond?
Yeah, please.
So I'm thinking of it, and I'm, again, maybe I'm overstating this, but my assumption is that, if they're doing construction, that's part of a larger situation anyway, right? And that would be a reason it wouldn't otherwise be exempted. But let's assume there's no construction happening, and they're if they're a single family or two family and there's no construction happening, they're exempt anyway, at least up to a certain size. I guess is your point that there are some sizes that aren't exempt in that case, 40-inch, I think, diameter and above, and that would be potentially burdensome? Is that because I'm not saying that I'm certain on this. I'm trying to game out what are potential scenarios here where somebody would be eligible under our other city programs for relief, but then also not have, and they don't have the means, but they also don't qualify for some other exemption.
Well, income, I mean, let's say you borrow money to add a mudroom, or you add a room for your parents, you add make an accessory apartment, and it needs a stairway and it interferes with a tree. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons that people who make 86 or 90 or whatever the number is, $1,000 may want to add something, do some construction, and then have to remove a tree. And if we're going to have a low income exemption, the real harm to low income people is, I don't even know what the new fees are, Commissioner Welch. If they're still $10,000 to remove a tree, I don't know what they are. But that's a lot of money to remove a tree if you have to build an accessory apartment. And it needs an outdoor stairway that interferes with a tree. I mean, there could be lots of reasons why.
So, President Albright, are you saying
I would have the exemption. I think the application fee is what is $150. That's not as harmful as the $10,000 they might have to pay to actually take the tree down.
But I think it's $200.
I think it's, I don't know.
Back to 150. Did we take out the $50 increase?
$50 increase.
So I think, Mr. Temple, I think we need to update that in the draft as well.
Yes.
So just
go ahead, Councilor
clarifying question. And again, I'm not trying to be argumentative or whatever. I may just be naive on this, but are there a lot of people that would meet the income threshold but are also doing construction projects?
I have no clue. I don't know. It's possible. Why would it not be possible? I mean, I'm not looking at who's doing construction in Newton these days. So
I would have assumed that if they were doing a construction project, that the replacement fee cost would be rolled into the construction project.
Okay, so add $10,000 to your accessory apartment. That makes it, that's wonderful. I'm just arguing that if it's a low income person, an exemption from the fee makes sense. And that's all.
Okay, so our three options here, and I'll go through these and we can take votes one at a time, is, as I see it, if there's another option, someone let me know. No low income exemption for anything, low income exemption from the application fee, and low income exemption from the requirements of the chapter. Is there an option that I'm not seeing?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
I guess I would just say that I think your statement is accurate, but you're going to just assume a motion in favor of one precludes the others. I just want to understand the sequencing. we're gonna do the option
We'll
two
start with,
first.
I'll start with no exemption, see if that has support. Then I'll go to just a fee exemption, see if that has support. And if you voted for the fee exemption, you can also then obviously vote for exemption from everything.
Okay.
And we'll see which
Thank
one of
you.
those prevails.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilor Crossley.
Thank you. Wasn't sure if you saw me. Well, this rubs right up against my only other concern. It's indirectly related to this, but I can tell you that as a practicing architect, I take on small projects throughout Newton, and the kinds of things I've been doing is helping people to stay in their homes. And that could be, you know, planning ahead a little bit ahead of retirement, or it could be planning to try to make their house work just so that they can remain in it. And I'm always pushing up against people's budgets, always, when we're talking about making an accessory apartment or making the house more accessible. And a lot of people live in small homes that, you know, they can't get around in right now, and a tiny addition could be all that's necessary to help open up the space and make the first floor livable. There's all kinds of situations out there that are not what we see in our land use committee, where people are doing giant things and very expensive things. So the other issue I have with this is that we're essentially adding what I consider to be a hardship to people's ability to make their homes work for them as they are growing their families here, aging in place, and all sorts of things. People want to change their living environment. And when they bought their house, whenever that was, they have certain property rights, which allow them to build within a certain limited footprint, not within the setbacks, not taller than what we allow and so forth, but they have a certain latitude. And we're exacting with this a large fee for the, to me, it seems like a fine, because they don't get anything for the fee. So it's not really a fee. You know, the person who's doing this doesn't get anything for it. And we're saying $10,000 a tree, or I know it depends on the size of the tree, but I also don't have a current list of what the fees are or the fines are, or the exaction is. I don't know what the right word is to call it. Maybe law can help with that. But I can see many potential situations until our community becomes all a very wealthy community. If we keep going in the same direction, there's still a lot of people here who are trying to just move into the future with the ability to stay in their home. So I have trouble with this if you're not going to also have some kind of a waiver provision for removal of the tree. But better than that is I would not be relating this to I like a lot of what you've done in the ordinance, but I would not be relating this ordinance to individuals wanting to improve their property in a way that they are today allowed to do by right if there's a tree in the way.
Councilor Humphrey.
Thank you. Okay, so I appreciate the discussion on this, as it was helpful and clarifying. And I think, you know, we've been discussing how to frame this one for a while. So I think that makes sense to me, what Councilor Crossley, or at least some of what Councilor Crossley said. I think, you know, for example, I don't want a low income senior who qualifies for the exemption to be struggling to afford putting in a wheelchair ramp or something like that because of the fee associated with replacement. So I think for that reason, and to be consistent with the policies that I've been promoting for the past 4 years on the finance committee side of things, with making it easier for people on, you know, low fixed incomes to stay in their homes and that sort of thing, you know, I can see the argument here for saying that the fee for replacement should be exempted if they've otherwise met the low income criteria. I don't think that we necessarily want to exempt them from the permitting process. And there was a query in that paragraph there from the law department as to whether or not it would be the replacement requirements or the whole permitting process. Because I do think part of the thrust of this overall reform is to say that there should be a permitting process that's consistent across the board, even if you're exempted from the replacement requirements and the replacement fees, so that we can kind of get a sense of what's going on overall in the city. So that's my suggestion at this point, based on the discussion we've just had, is that we say that the replacement fee, but not the permit process, should also be exempted if they meet the income qualifications outlined there that we have elsewhere.
Okay, you know, I in some ways, I think that also raises potentially a fourth possibility. Councilor Baker, check me on this one. No exemption, exemption from the application fee only, exemption from the compliance potential fee, compliance replacement requirements, or 4, exemption from everything. Folks think those are the 4 options? Okay. Councilor Maliki.
Yeah, just a quick thought. I'm kind of seeing the law department's point here. We don't have a low income process for building permit fees, for example, do we? It just seems like you're kind of tying yourselves into knots over something that is sort of inconsistent with everything else we do.
Councilor Baker.
I'm not really go as far as Councilor Crossley, because I think that part of the reason for this is to think about what we're doing with these trees if you're building something. So I'm not prepared to go that far. I just want to clarify.
Okay.
So if we go, we can do it.
Okay, so we'll go no exemption, application fee exemption, requirements of the replacement fee exemption, all exemption in that order, okay? Vote 1 is on no exemption at all for low-income individuals. Those in favor of no exemption for low-income individuals, please raise your hand.
Sorry, let me not confuse people.
Thank you. Okay, I'm seeing no support for that. Okay. A low-income exemption, presumably again, as drafted by the law department. I haven't heard anyone who sees it needing to be drafted in other ways, so let's put that aside. A low-income exemption exclusively for the application fee, the $150.
We could vote on more than
Yes, you can.
one.
Yep. 2 in support of that. I'm in support of that as well. So that's 3.
Yeah,
Three
I'm
in
raising my hand on that one too.
4. We got 4. Okay, we got a majority support for at least a low-income exemption from the application fee. Okay, sort of next level up as I'm thinking of it, exemption from the replacement fee under the chapter for low income. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Can I just ask those of us with our hands up? I intended that to be both the application fee and the requirement. So, well, I guess that would be the next one. Exemption from everything. So sorry, I confused myself. Low-income exemption for requirements from the chapter, which would be both the application fee and the replacement fee.
Excuse me, I think that includes the application, but not the application fee. Right? A total exemption means they don't have to do anything if they low. Is that right?
That's right.
So this would be total exemption from any requirement.
From any financial requirements.
Any requirement, okay.
But they're also exempt from the permit process?
Not the permit process. The 2 components would be the application fee and a replacement fee.
Well, I thought we decided those 2.
We decided them individually, not collectively.
Oh.
And I think we had a majority for both.
Yeah,
so I think we have a majority collectively.
Yeah, you do, I think.
Right. Okay. Okay. So I think that settles that. It stays in, I think, exactly as drafted. And I think what that means is the committee supports what the law department drafted. Mr. Temple, would you agree with that?
Yes, so just
Okay.
so I understand it, it is now it's an exemption just from the permit filing fee, which does
Or the
not
replacement
apply.
fee
Say it again.
and the replacement fee.
And the replacement fee. So both.
Yes.
All right. So I may consider moving this to a different section then, because I think as it's written now, it's associated with the permit fee. I think it would make more sense to, I'm not quite sure where, but probably to move it to the replacement section. Have language in the fee as well as in the replacement section, perhaps.
Okay, again, I think, by saying the requirements of this section probably covers the whole thing, but if you want to clarify that by putting it in two places, or even in two places saying the requirements of this subsection, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, you're right that as written, it covers more. It's more about where it's located. But I think that's a minor issue of clarity that we will clean up before the order goes to full council.
Yeah, I mean, and we have a pretty strong history on this committee of just drafting it and, no problem, we'll just review that and everything will be fine. Sorry, that was just a little joke. Okay. Thank you, Councilor Brady.
I'm with you.
All right, next bullet in the memo. One of the other changes was in 2183D, they amended the section addressing the tree warden's review of permit applications to clarify that it applies to both tree permits and exemption permits. There were a number of places where I think it just said tree permits and they added in and exemption permits. Everyone okay with this? Good. New section 2183 F or G. In the memo, it says added F after G, but I don't think that's right. Oh, you added F before G. That's what it was. Okay. No exemption permit shall be issued unless the tree to be removed meets the definition of exempt tree. I think that's pretty straightforward. Clarified something needed. Everyone okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay. 2183G clarified that the tree warden has the authority when issuing tree permits to create conditions to protect abutting trees within a tree save area. Again, I think this was our intention. I think I'm going to credit Councilors Norton and Malicki with catching this. Thank you. And I think it's a good addition and clarifies what our intention was. Everyone agree? Okay. And seeing no objection. Hey, we are through 2 pages of the 3.5-page memo. Ladies and gentlemen, we are on our way. On our way. 4 remaining bullets in the changes that were made. The performance of work section 2183H, requiring documentation of protective measures to be submitted to the tree warden prior to commencing work. Like I said, 2183H. Everyone okay with the edits in that section? I think they look good. Okay. 2183J, make the suspension and revocation provision apply to both tree permits and exemption permits. I struggled with this for a minute. I was trying to think of when an exemption permit would be suspended or revoked, but I think it's probably belt and suspenders. Better to have it in there than not. Everyone okay with that? Okay. 2185B, clarifying that a protected tree that does not meet the definition of exempt tree shall be replaced when it is removed without a tree permit. Everyone okay with that? Okay.
I think that's really helpful because I think it's, again, tries to make it understandable.
Yep, I agree. 2185C. Clarifying the annual report submitted includes the size of trees planted and removed. Everyone okay with that? Okay. I think that's the easy part of the agenda. Now we have some questions. So there were some additional issues. We'll go through them sort of one at a time. But I think Councilors Norton and Malicki Wright wanted some things either clarified or added. So in 2183B, this is the application requirements for an exempt application, I believe, right? Okay. So they would like tree protection plan, tree plan, notification of abutters, plan of the property, and plan of utility services and roadway. Required submissions prior to the removal of an exempt tree. Anyone want to weigh in on this? Mr. Yo.
Well, I'll let counselors first.
I see no hands from counselors yet. Mr. Yo.
Well, Counselor Crossley.
Counselor Crossley.
Yep.
Okay, with nobody else, I think these are onerous for the exemption permit application. I think, I mean, if you think realistically about what people go through to improve their properties and for whatever reason, this is a lot of extra baggage and it's expensive. You know, they're going to have to hire an arborist to do this stuff. These are not inexpensive services to maintain. And again, I'll put it in the context of not necessarily people who qualify for low income exemptions, but just ordinary people. Everybody in the city of Newton is not, you know, gushing money. So I'm not sure what the value of this is actually.
Thank you, Counselor Norton. I'm guessing you feel differently.
Yeah, I mean, I get that Counselor Crossley's perspective is that she works with homeowners who are trying to carry out projects, and that might be what's leading to so many suggestions that what is being proposed in this ordinance is onerous, but the whole idea of the ordinance is to make it more onerous to remove trees, because we're starting with the assumption that trees are a form of green infrastructure that provide almost uncountable benefits to our public health and safety, wildlife, habitat, biodiversity, et cetera. So if you start with a different sort of lens, if you will, that we are destroying our seed corn, that we're destroying what protects us and makes us healthier and happier, then these all to me seem reasonable. So the idea is that since a lot of the trees would now be exempt, continue to be exempt with this ordinance because of various decisions that the committee has made, at least there would be, even with the exempt trees, you know, a plan from a certified arborist laying out, especially how the abutter trees would be protected, laying out what is on the lot, because, you know, we don't have any data on trees on private lots. It would require the notification of the abutters, which is a huge advantage to this ordinance. And then the other things, I can't even remember what the benefits of those were, but I know that we had a reason for having them in there. And so hopefully Pam and Julia could remember. But certainly to me, to say that none of these are valuable, then why is this whole thing valuable? This is, to me, this is incredibly important to get that data that we don't have. And at some point, we may want to change I would hope that we'll change the requirements and be protecting even more trees that are falling through the cracks in the draft as we have it so far. So to me, these are sort of central, particularly the first three, to why we're doing this in the first place.
President Albright.
So is this is a question for the tree warden, for Commissioner
Deputy Commissioner Welch.
Yeah, Deputy Commissioner Wells. If you have a tree that is diseased, do you need to file for an exemption to remove it?
If under the proposed language, if you have a tree that is diseased on your lot, yes, you need to file for a tree permit to remove it.
Okay, so if I have we had a very large tree that was on the edge between my house and my neighbor's house. And the first year in one hurricane, part of it fell on my house. And the second year in another hurricane, part of it fell on the other house, my neighbor's house. So we removed that tree. If I had to now, the tree was clearly, it had a problem. And so to remove that tree, I would have to have, well, it didn't have to notify the abutters because we both had the problem. We would have to make a plan of my do I create the plan, or do I have to hire an arborist to make this? And the plan of the utility services on my roadway, who does that? Do I have to hire do I get DigSafe to do that? Who does that? And what tree protection plan? The protection of the other trees on my property? I don't understand the purpose of all of this. And I know that Councilor Norton would love to have a lot of data, but this is onerous for just removing a diseased tree.
Thank you, President Albright. Councilor Maliki.
Thank you. So the reason for this, there's several reasons. First of all, you don't want someone coming in and saying my tree is diseased and not having any verification. This is supposed to relieve work on the tree warden by having a certified arborist attest to the fact that a tree is diseased, rather than, taking somebody's word for it, which might not be correct, or having to have Mark go out and inspect every tree. The other main point is that early on in this process, Councilor Norton and I, we wanted to include all lots. We wanted to include, all lots down to a smaller tree size. But, you all told us, well, we can revisit that later. We don't know how much difference that will make. So we need to collect data to see how much we're losing by not covering those trees under 40 inches on 1 and 2 family lots. So if we're not collecting the data, we're sort of going back on that promise of figuring out what we were losing by exempting all those trees and lots. So I think it is very important. And you want that tree plan and tree protection plan to be prepared by a certified arborist, so you know that Mark will have accurate data. And also it's important for the protection of abutter trees, because whether applicant turns out to be exempt or not exempt, the abutters trees can be just as damaged by the work on the abutting lot, on the applicant's lot, whether or not that applicant is exempt.
Councilor Humphrey.
Thank you. Regarding C, the notification point, my sense was that that was already consistent with the intent of the committee from prior discussions, once we had moved notification out of city hands and to the private property owners. And so I thought we had already kind of agreed that even with an exemption permit, maybe I'm wrong, but I thought we had kind of agreed that there would be notification in there. It's private notification, I guess, but still notification nonetheless. And then one question that I had is, I think just addressed by what we heard, but does the protection plan help with protecting abutter trees that are pretty close to the property line, like from root damage and things like that? Because I could see the rationale for that. Even if we're saying this is, it's exempt, like that you don't damage your neighbor's trees while removing your own tree.
If I'm not mistaken, that's in the definition of tree protection plan. It includes both trees on the property and on abutters properties. Someone correct me if that's wrong.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So, I can see the argument there. Not really sure about the D and E. I just don't really know what those are about here. And then B, I understood for the rationale that Councilor Norton was mentioning, about the data collection and so forth, or maybe it was Councilor Maliki. Anyway, I understand that's also a lot of work, so I don't know, but I'm just going through the points here as I saw it.
Thank you. Councilor Greenberg.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just find this whole section very confusing because it's so vague. I don't know how a property owner is going to fulfill all 5 of these requirements. Do they have to hire a utility service professional and have a plan, and then an arborist? I just don't understand. And then if we're trying to save Mr. Walsh from doing work and visiting a tree, he has to go through all this paperwork and review it all and make sure it's accurate and verifiable. I think that's more work for him. I think this is way too onerous on a property owner. I don't agree with this.
You, Counselor Baker, I believe you haven't spoken yet.
Thank you. What I'm trying to understand is what is available that could be done relatively simply. I assume that if you're going to have work like this done, generally speaking, somebody comes in that's a tree company that has some experience in removing trees, right? I mean, this is an exempt tree in this context would be not something the homeowner does his or herself. And so what I'm trying to figure out is whether there's something that can be done as part of that, just like when you have a contractor come on your property to do a building, they usually go and get the building permit. The owner doesn't do that. So what I'm curious from my colleagues who support this, is there some sense that there is something that's relatively simple that could be done that would include the notice to the abutters and a simple plan of what's on the lot and where the exempt tree is without necessarily requiring a survey, so that everybody knows what's going on and the application is complete for so that the commissioner can take a look at it and understand. I think we want to try and minimize the burdens, as colleagues have indicated, but have enough information so that people know what's going on. And maybe something that's not in there is a photograph of the exempt tree, you know, just so that there's some idea of what's being proposed. So maybe that's implicit in the application. I can't recall that provision, but the point I'm trying to get at is something that's relatively easy to do, but gives enough information to everybody who might be concerned about it so that they can understand what's going on. I'd welcome some comments from my colleagues who know more about this than I do.
All right, thank you. I'm going to go back to folks who have already spoken. Mr. Yo, do you want to weigh in before I go back to counselors?
Yes, thank you. Perhaps Mark could speak to that last point. A good comment from Counselor Baker. I think that is the intention. I think what is proposed here is way too onerous, and we would be very much opposed to this creation. We're already creating a huge industry for certified tree arborists here with this entire ordinance in a good way. We're happy to be doing it. To be now also doing it for exempt trees and all these other requirements is way too much. So, and remember, we're going down to 6 inches now. So we're already expanding our tree universe pretty significantly. So there's a lot of new requirements here, and we're trying to figure out how Mark is going to do this all himself. Now applying all of this to exempt trees is too much, but I think we do want, Mark, if you want to speak quickly to what your thinking is on identifying the tree, the exempt tree, and making sure we know where it is and what it is.
Sure. Yeah. So that's why I have my hand up. The current proposed language, just so we're all clear, so it's in front of you, is that when someone applies for the removal of a tree, that they have to prove that it's an exempt tree. So for purposes of this discussion, and part of what they'll need to supply is documentation showing that the trees to be removed meet the definitions. And then they need to provide the species, the size of each tree being removed, the reason for the tree removal, a diagram and or photograph depicting the location of each tree to be removed. And at that point, they would, we would also have the leeway to request additional information. So for us, we see that as providing information about any other trees that fall within what we call the tree save area that's defined earlier in the ordinance. So that would capture an abutters tree that could potentially be impacted, or other trees to remain on the lot. We don't see this as needing to be, I could see this a typical estimate from an arborist from a tree company. We'll have a sketch of the property, what they intend to do, how they intend to do it in very detail. Most tree companies now get super specific. It's not just we're cutting a tree down. They'll say we're cutting a 13-inch oak tree down located at this spot down to the stump. We will enter your property with X type of equipment. And it's all very clear about what they're going to do. And we could easily add on standard language to our permits that, the standard protection language is, and that we would expect to protect the surrounding trees. But I also think it's important. We're talking about this like it's like these trees that require a tree company. There are times where a property owner could easily remove a small tree without the need of power tools and equipment. And putting it out to yard waste. A 6-inch tree can be a tree that can be put out in yard waste. So I think it's important to understand that, for an exempt lot, it's not just big trees we're talking about here.
Thank you. All right, Councilor Kelly.
Thank you. I just guess I'll say, because this is the first time I've spoken on this, that overall I'm very much in support of this entire initiative and the work that your committee and the group has done on this. I will just follow up on some comments that Mr. Yo made. As a landscape designer, most of my clients are in Newton, and most are, as Councillor Crossley referred to, as like regular people in Newton. And I think some of the requirements in this
does not mean we will have data on trees, on people's lots. I mean, if you want to collect data on trees and on people's lots, it has to be digital, it has to be accessible, and having hundreds of pieces of paper with tree plans will not help us. Thank you.
I think the plan is to make it digital. That's the point. Everything would be, Mark has said, once this passes, everything will get uploaded to NewGov.
But it's just,
Counselor
can I just add that
Go ahead.
that's just a plan. It doesn't say it's, 3 Norway maples and 2 apple trees. It doesn't, you can't do anything with the data that's in that plan. So anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Counselor Kelly. Okay, Counselor Humphrey.
Thank you. I appreciated the explanation from Mr. Welsh about what exactly he's going to be collecting anyway already for these exemptions. I was satisfied with that explanation that it is going to get us what we need and not be overly burdensome. I do still think, though, as I mentioned earlier, that notification of abutters I felt was consistent with the previous discussions on the issue of notification of abutters, especially now that it's been taken out of the city staff responsibility. So that's the part that I think, we could put that in there. But otherwise, I think some of this stuff we may have to circle back to in future reforms because we got to get something done and on the books here. I don't want us to end with nothing at all getting changed.
Okay. So let's now take a vote on whether we want to add applications about required submissions for an exemption permit application. Councilor Baker, are you looking to weigh in before we vote?
Yeah, if you can. I just want to associate myself with Councilor Humphrey, and I don't know if this list represents exactly what we heard from Mr. Welsh plus the notification. If we can frame the vote along those lines, I think it would be an advantage, and then maybe fill in the blanks a little bit after we see what the committee's will is.
Okay, so would you guys like to first vote on whether you think abutters should be notified of an exemption permit application? And I guess that would mean similar to the tree permit application in 2183 A1C, adding in an affidavit attesting that the applicant provided notice to the owners of all abutting properties, assuming again across the right of way for the exemption permit. That's what you get. That's what you're talking about, Councilor Humphrey and Councilor Baker, right?
Yes.
Okay. So first we'll talk about that. We'll vote on whether to add in a similar provision to the exemption permit application, which is exclusively notification of abutters. After that, we'll vote on whether to add in these additional application requirements. We'll just look at all 5 of them. Let's assume for the sake of argument that it's all 5, and we'll vote on whether to add those in or not. Okay. All right, so this first vote is exclusively on notification to abutters of an exemption permit application. Okay, everyone in support of adding that in, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, right, Humphrey, Baker, correct? Okay, thank you, take them down. Those opposed to adding in a butter notification to exemption applications, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. Abstentions? Oh, there are only 6 of us, right? Okay, so that doesn't get added in. Now let's talk about adding in, as we have in the memo, the additional applications to the exemption permit application. Those in favor of adding in the suite of
I have a question. Can we vote on them one at a time, just like we just did with the notification of butters? Because I don't feel strongly on D and E.
Sure. Those in favor of adding a tree protection plan?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Councilor Baker.
Is that what Mr. Welsh was talking about? Or is this another? Because I want to make sure we codify what he represented, and I'm not sure that.
I think Mr. Welch referenced essentially a tree plan, not necessarily along the definition of what we have in the ordinance already, but what is likely to come to him. Mr. Welch, you correct me if I'm wrong.
You're correct. It would be essentially the same, but I think this is a little bit like the issue I raised earlier. In the examples that we've heard today about trees being removed because they were at risk of failing. If we go by the letter of the definition of the tree plan as it's written currently or is currently proposed, I will need to know the sizes and the species and the diameters of all the trees on that person's lot. What I was saying is our normal course would be to ask for that information for anything within what we are calling the tree save area near the trees where it's being abutted. So it's different. It's not every tree. It's the trees that could be impacted during the tree removal process.
That's not represented on this list as I hear it. Is that right?
That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, it's slightly different, but it's not the same.
All right, let me try this instead of going through all 5. How many don't want to add requirements to the exemption permit application? Because if there's at least a majority, then we don't have to go through these one by one. I certainly feel like the exemption application is a little bit of a different ballgame. Exempt trees by definition, I think we're less concerned with under the ordinance. So I'm not prepared to add more requirements to that process. So can I get a show of hands for anyone who does not want to add to the exemption permit process? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. I think that means we're not going to get a majority on any of these. Thank you. Councilor Ray, I know it's not the way you wanted, but you would acknowledge that that's where the committee's at, right? We don't need to go through them? Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just to clarify
Yes,
though,
sir.
Mr. Welch indicated what he was going to ask for. Can we somehow get a sense if that's going to occur?
Mr. Welch, do you think that there's language needed to required to add to the ordinance under perhaps the exemption permit application process to get at what? I mean, I think that's what's in there, right? The documentation showing the tree to be removed.
Yes, that's what's in there. Required documentation and the reasons for removal and pictures and diagrams are currently proposed language.
Right, but you mentioned if I, excuse me, Mr. Welch, also that just an understanding of the area to be affected, right? The tree protection zone or something, a phrase you used, I'm not sure exactly how represented.
Yeah, so I did mention that. And that's something we would automatically include for everything we ask for, but.
Okay, I guess I just want to make sure that if you're asking for it, it's included in some way that people can't come back and say, wait a minute, you can't ask for that. That's all.
Well, I have the first sentence is an application for an exempt permit shall be submitted to the tree warden in the form and manner specified by the tree warden.
Okay.
So the tree warden can ask.
All right.
For other things.
Okay. I think this one's a little bit easier, the next one, which is currently, if folks go to.
Excuse me?
Page 10, Councilor Maliki.
I was just going to suggest, following the comments of Councilor Baker and Mark Welch, if you added to the language that's in the draft now, where it says the size and species of each tree being removed, the reason for tree removal, and a diagram and or photograph depicting the location of each tree to be removed, comma, that encompasses the tree save area of trees to remain. I think that would reflect what Mark intends to do.
I hear you, Councilor Maliki. We just voted to not change these requirements at all. So I'm going to move on to the next thing.
You voted to not add any
requirements. We voted to not add any requirements.
All right, just trying to make a suggestion. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
I guess maybe not.
The next item is currently the draft does not require a fee for exemption permits. That's the actual language. There's language that requires the $150 application fee for tree permit. But currently there is no application fee for an exemption permit. There was a request to have the $150 fee apply to exemption permits as well. Do folks want to apply the fee to the exemption permit as well? Councilor Maliki.
I think we should be applying the fee to all applications. It's a relatively nominal amount. It makes a contribution to the administrative costs of administering the ordinance. Thank you.
Councilor Baker.
I just want to ask Mr. Welch, it does take some time and effort, and fees are generally designed to assist, as Councilor Maliki indicated, the cost of the administration's decisions. So I'm somewhat sympathetic to that idea. I wonder what Mr. Welch thinks about.
I think that, you know, and whether we touch on the fact that we're just looking to leave the $150 fee as is, I think that's something we need to collect more data on, and that's something we can address in the future. But right now, whether we collect $150 for every application or $0 or $1,000, it doesn't change. There's no additional expense to the city at this time. It's my time. It doesn't change.
So I don't hear you asking for a fee for the exempt permit.
Correct. We don't think it's necessary. Our proposed, way back in the beginning of this, our proposal proposed no fee for the exemption permit.
Okay.
President Albright.
So I'm going to say that I don't want an exemption fee, but I'm not going to argue against myself and say, Deputy Commissioner Welch, your time is worth something. So I know it's just your time, but your time is worth a lot. But anyway, I'm still saying no exemption fee.
Yeah, thank you. No, we'll again, I think that's something I think we need to, once we have some time with this revision to the ordinance, looking at what the staff time really is, then we have to look at different scenarios moving forward. But for this purpose, for right now, I don't think it makes a big impact.
Just quickly to add on to Mark, we will be looking at the staffing requirements. Mark, there's no way that we can expect Mark to continue to do this all himself. So we are trying to find ways of using, because there will be new revenue coming in to the tree fund and using the tree fund. So we're working with the law department and Mark and the CFO regarding that going forward. So we can't have Mark doing 3 jobs. So
Councilor Norton.
So the argument about how much it costs is not that big a deal. That could be the case of a lot of things that we require permits for. So it definitely seems odd to me, especially when we're in a revenue constricted time, that we would just let this class of people who have a specific, with this specific need, not pay a fee. I think people expect to pay a fee. So it seems odd to me that we would be leaving this group out. So I would encourage us to keep it in.
Yeah, you mean add it in, right?
I guess add it in. I thought we had it in there, yeah.
No, I just want to be, okay, thank you. Councilor Maliki, your hand is up. Is that remnant or are you looking away?
No, yeah, and we actually thought the committee had agreed long ago that there was going to be a fee for every permit. But as to the amount, $150 is $150, and it buys a tree from Schichtel's nursery. So it's better to have it than not.
Okay, so the question is on adding in a fee for the exemption permit. Presume it would be $150. Those in favor of adding in the fee on the exemption permit, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. Okay, take them down. Those opposed to adding a $150 fee on the exemption permit, raise your hand. 2, 3. So tie, so no, does not pass. We do not add it at this time. Number 3 here is the low income exemption. I believe we addressed that earlier. If anyone disagrees, let me know. But okay, number 4 here, 2185B, governing the requirement that removal of a protected tree without a permit will require the tree to be replaced or payment in lieu made in accordance with the ordinance. So again, this is 2185B. And if you actually look at the draft of the ordinance, I think there's a helpful comment in there about sort of where it would be. Trying to get the page for you, I apologize. page 12, 13 of the agenda. Folks want to weigh in on this one? Councilor Greenberg, is your hand up to weigh in on this one? I think she's been having trouble logging on. President Albright? President Albright, you're on mute.
I'm wondering how do we inform people that about this new tree ordinance, all these new rules? So if I maybe I should have come for a tree exemption permit before when I removed that big tree that I told you about earlier, but I didn't know that. How do you let people know, Mr. Welsh, that these new requirements are here?
So our plan will be at minimum, well, so first of all, in general, if it all passes, would be a lot of messaging around it. So that'd be from whether that's the mayor's newsletter, the city's website. We will also, regardless of the outcome, we'll message out to every tree company that we can find in the phone book and online. We will send them information. And then we'll also be sending everyone who's ever applied for a building or a tree permit, probably in the last, say, 5 years, as long as we have all their correct contact information, we're going to send them information.
Okay.
And it'll direct them to a location on the city's website where we will, do a much better job about beefing up the information, posting the dollar amounts, all of the things that we've talked about. I do think, though, that this is an area where I also have a concern. We generally like to be work with residents to compliance. And I do see many scenarios where trees could be removed that otherwise would have been exempt. It was innocent. They either didn't know, or quite frankly, it's just, let's work towards compliance. And I'd rather have the opportunity to warn somebody than have to find them right off the bat and have to make replacement a requirement if it was otherwise just a typical innocent type of tree removal where it was a dangerous tree or something. It feels like there should be some flexibility there than immediately requiring a penalty for replacement.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
Councilor Baker.
So I guess I'd like to think about this with the committee because what we're talking about is the loss of a tree that would otherwise be protected. I'm sorry, let me be clear about it. As opposed to a conventional situation where you warn someone in order to bring them into compliance. In this context, you have a loss of a tree without the process being followed. And the concern I guess I have is I'm sympathetic to Mr. Welsh's idea but I think the problem is you don't really know once the tree is gone, what was there before, right? I mean, the whole idea behind the permitting process, as I hear it, is to have some advance notice so we can say, yes, this is exempt, or no, it isn't. Somehow coming in and looking at a stump after the fact and saying, well, it would have been exempt, I find a little difficult, though I fully understand there are innocent mistakes. So I guess what I'm curious about, to follow up on the president's question, is the notice in here, it seems to me, involving advising the tree companies especially. We found this in the landscaper work on the leaf blower issue, that it's really important to have those folks somehow in the game, because they're the ones that should be applying for the permits. If a homeowner makes this decision on their own, I can seem a little more sympathetic to it. What I'm worried about is that you end up with a tree that's cut down and there's really no way of, it obviously can't grow back and obviously can't be replaced, but it could have been protected, or it could have been at least understood whether it was exempt or not. You want to find those out in advance. So I'm not quite ready to say no to this, but I would like some thought by the committee and others about how we can accomplish the objective of getting people in the door rather than just say, oh, gee, too bad, you made a mistake and that's it.
Councilor Crossley.
Thank you. Actually, I'm confused by the language of number 4 because in the bold print, it seems as though it's governing the requirement that removal of a protected tree without a permit will require the tree to be replaced, but then it talks about the exempt tree. What you're really talking about here is whether or not, I believe, whether or not to institute a penalty for taking down an exempt tree. So, for example, if
Sure.
the
Yeah, I'll
arborist-
just clarify. What I think what the memo is pointing out is that there is a provision in the ordinance which says that a protected tree that is moved without permission will still be subject to the replacement requirements. The question is, do we want to add something in about exempt trees that are removed without approval?
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to be clear on that. And then in which case I appreciate Mr. Welsh's comments, and I think it would be unfair to start off with all of these massively new requirements with also adding in a penalty for taking on an exempt tree without a permit, because I appreciate that there's going to be some advertising of this, but I can tell you when our tree had to come down after that windstorm a few years back, I didn't know that we needed to have a permit to take down the damaged tree. And it was not presented to me by the company or company who's done work here before. So I think it's going to take some time for this information to get out into the community.
Councilor Humphrey.
Thank you. I see 4 and 5 as being closely related issues, and I think Councilor Baker got to this point in a good way. For example, I do see similar parallels around the issue of like the tree removal companies, similar to like the landscaping companies when we talked about the leaf blower things, and that made that focus and education part of it made it a much more effective ordinance. However, as we've already discussed tonight, there are also going to be scenarios, especially with exempt trees, where a homeowner is just going in with a little handsaw and sawing down a smaller tree, maybe not realizing that this is now handled differently. So I definitely think a warning component is hugely important just for making this work, because as we've all seen, there has been a total breakdown in the local media landscape. It is very hard to get the word out widely and universally to everyone in the city about major changes like this. I don't want to be penalizing people who did make an innocent mistake, right? I think there are some scenarios where we know people are going to be trying to, get away with something. I'm not really talking about that. I think there's going to be a lot of scenarios where people just don't realize that we've made a change here. In addition, though, and I think Councilor Baker was getting to this, maybe I misheard, but the troubling thing about number 4 is that, assuming this was legitimately going to be exempted, then they wouldn't have paid a replacement fee. I don't know why we would say, other than essentially trying to fine people with a much larger fine, which the law department has said we're not really allowed to do. You can have a fine for for violation itself, but in terms of the bigger picture here, they've said that we can't really impose a punitive fee. It has to be a replacement fee, not a punitive fee, is essentially the point that I'm making. And so, there is a fine we've talked about. Okay, fair enough. And I think a warning is important as well as part of that. But I don't think it makes sense intuitively to me to say, okay, they didn't realize that they were supposed to do this. They would have been exempted and wouldn't have paid a fee, but now they're going to have to pay this huge fee. So to my mind, 5 makes sense, 4 less so. I think there's ways that the warden can handle this in terms of an education campaign and so forth. But I am very wary as a sitting elected official, and especially as a ward councilor, of passing something significant that is going to be hard to get the word out on, at least for a while, and then saying, sorry, you didn't know about this thing, so you're going to get hit with this massive fee that you wouldn't have had to pay had you known about this? I mean, that just logically does not make a whole lot of sense to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Humphrey, and thank you for introducing number 5. I should have mentioned these together. I apologize that I didn't. You're 100% right. They're related. For those who haven't read it yet, number 5 is essentially the request by the tree warden to add into the penalty section the opportunity to issue a warning to an individual who has removed an exempt tree without permission, without a permit. So that's essentially a, sort of, I think what Councilor Baker was talking about a little bit, but go ahead, Councilor Baker.
Yeah, no, I think Councilor Humphreys stated it well, and I would agree with him, because I think if the actual removal of the tree would be not require a payment, which I think is important, to make the failure to apply, I think is going to get us into difficulty. So this may be one of those cases where we have to start off with an education process and then see where it goes. If there's abuses where people are coming in and we think they're claiming exemption when and there's no way to prove otherwise, but you think it's a subterfuge, then I hope Mr. Welch will be willing to come back to us and recommend that we do something different.
Councilor Greenberg, is your hand up? Are you there?
Yeah, so hi, sorry, Chair, I was having a problem with my connection.
Understood, no worries.
I agree with Councilor Humphrey and Councilor Baker. I don't think there should be a penalty and there should be a warning system. I was just thinking, how we have the landscapers registered with the city. I'm wondering if we could have the tree removal services folks maybe do something similar, or maybe require them to ask the resident for the permit in hand before they actually do the work. Just so that when they do hire the tree removal service, that the tree removal services would tell the resident, I can't do the work until you have that permit in hand. Maybe that's one way we can get the word out. Just a thought.
Interesting thought. I know that registering landscapers was a big component of bringing folks into compliance with the leaf blower ordinance, and that was very helpful. Feels difficult to add that to this ordinance at this time, but maybe that's just because it's late. But as Councilor Baker knows, I love to visit and revisit certain ordinances that we've passed. So Councilor Greenberg, maybe that's something we should look at next term.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'm hearing support for number 5, not support for number 4. Does anyone want to take a vote on number 4? Are we okay going to number 5? Okay, number 5. Those in favor of adding the opportunity for the tree warden to issue a warning when a exempt tree is moved without a permit, can you raise your hand, please? 3, 4, okay. That's at least 5. And I think Councilor Greenberg is trying to raise her hand. Right, Councilor Greenberg? Okay, well, it's enough. Anyway, so we got support for that.
Mr. Chairman, just a clarification.
Sure, go ahead.
Implicit in this to me is that, somebody makes a mistake and then you get a warning rather than a fine, and that's fine. But if the same owner comes back a second time, I guess the question is, I would assume the commissioner might be more sparing in his discretion.
Mr. Welch, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, but two. I'd like to point out 2 things. If there is a scenario where a property owner who would otherwise be exempt removes an exempt tree without a permit, we would, assuming that there isn't something, we don't feel like there's nefarious activities going on, we're going to issue a warning. But as part of that warning, we're still going to require they file for a tree permit post removal of the tree, so that we can document that tree and the other things, the trees near it. That way we have a record that they've done it before. And then if should they come back to us or do have a repeat activity, we'll already have documented the previous instance and we can find it. Because realistically, I'd like to think I can remember them all, but I'm not going to remember them all. So we're going to need to have that trail, that paper trail, if you will, digital paper trail with that information in it.
You would call it a paper cut, maybe. Never mind. Sorry.
Councilor Wright.
I have a question, and maybe this is just introducing something the last hour that shouldn't be. But is there anything, there's the education for the tree removal company. And so, yes, the homeowner, you can give them a pass. Wonder if a tree removal company has done it 2 or 3 times. Is there any way to go after them because they're not following the rules?
I think as we have it now, we would track who's doing it, because one of the requirements that will be part of any permit application is the name of the tree company doing the company doing the tree removal work. So we could probably conceivably come up with a scenario where we can track that. Right now, there isn't a mechanism that would penalize the tree company specifically at the moment as things are written.
Well, at least, yeah, okay, I understand that, and maybe that's going to be round 2 at another, next year or the year after, whatever. But it would be good that if, you see a tree company, they need education. They should also know better, and kind of just like, the leaf blower.
Yeah. Again, we'll track the company, and in a scenario, we would also, I see us re-notifying not just the property owner, but the person who did the cutting, assuming we have that information. There is a possibility that we wouldn't have that information. And we are also focusing on tree companies here in this discussion. Plenty of landscapers cut down trees, plenty of masons cut down trees, you name it. If there's other people that do this work, so it's sometimes not possible to capture every last person, but because there are more reputable tree companies, more qualified tree companies in the Newton area than any other place in the country, chances are most of it's being done by one of those companies that have a reputation on the line.
Councilor Baker, are you looking to get in again?
No, I'm just having trouble moving my hand down. Sorry, just hanging
Okay,
out.
I think we have one last issue, which is the effective date. As drafted, the effective date is January 1st, which is now a month away, and we haven't yet gone to full council. I would suggest that we want to move that back a little bit to give some time to implement this and some time to educate folks. This is sort of what we've done with other ordinances, but what do folks on the committee think?
Yeah.
I agree.
Just
okay.
as a practical matter.
March 15th, June 1st, what do folks, May 1st, what do folks think is appropriate to give some time here and hopefully hit the spring, summer season?
Does our tree warden have a recommendation?
Good question. Mr. Welch?
I would say that for us, with all the prep work we need to do, probably March 1st would be a good time frame.
All right, I'll suggest that.
Yep.
Councilor Humphrey, March 1st, that's a good suggestion. Thank you. Councilor Maliki?
I was going to suggest February 1 to minimize any tree cutting that hasn't already happened. And, winter is a fine time for tree cutting. The ground is solid. But March 1st is, I guess, okay. Would have preferred February 1.
Okay. Folks on the committee, do we have unanimous consent for March 1st?
Yes.
Yeah.
Recommend? Okay.
Yep.
So move that to March 1st. Any other issues before someone on the committee could potentially move approval?
I was hoping to move approval.
Councilor Humphrey has moved approval.
Before you do.
Which item? Both items? I don't even know what we're doing here.
Well,
There's only one version now,
Yeah,
so
Just in terms of procedurally, Jackman, what do we do here? Do we just move approval of both items as one? I don't know procedurally what to do.
I don't think that would work. I think we'd have to say that one of them is now the vehicle that has been hollowed out and filled in. That's what they do in Congress.
I agree with
NA.
Councilor Humphrey.
Okay, so why don't we move I think you'll move approval on 41122, which was the councilor's item as rewritten. And then after that, we can move no action necessary on the other item. Folks, if that works in terms of procedure, okay? So we have a draft. We have some last minute changes to make. I assume this will be on second call, so we can get to look at that anyway. I see a couple hands before we do this. I see. Councilor Baker?
So I'm certainly gonna appreciate the work, I wanted to say that has gone into this by so many people that have made this possible, and I don't think we should close the meeting without that. And I also acknowledge the efforts of the chair to move this whole process along, as well as interject a little humor on occasion. The question, though, that I did want to, with the Chief Administrative Officer, Mr. Welch, the conversation around education, and you've indicated a little bit of this process, but I hope that there can be, at least in the report, and maybe even a note from the Chief Administrative Officer, Mr. Welch, about the education process that we need to undertake here, because this is, even by deferring it to March 1st, there's still a lot of folks that need to understand what's going on. And I think that's a key component of making this work, not just to get the language right. So that's all.
We absolutely agree, Mark. We have a lot of work ahead of us, and it will be critical to get out the word, and you all can help us. So it will be a team effort.
Yeah, I don't see that as an issue. I've already started writing down ideas, and we've already started discussing it. So
thank you all. Councilor Crossley.
Thank you. I gather that you somehow separated the cost schedule that you're going to apply to people when they take down these trees from the ordinance. But to me, it would be really important to be able to see what's being proposed. The first schedules I saw were astonishing, and it would certainly impact my vote, particularly in terms of how you're proposing to apply these to homeowners. If they're trying to, as I said earlier, you're not going to penalize people who are who qualify for low income, but there's all those other regular people who are just, as Andrea and I have described them, who are just trying to make their house livable, and they may not qualify for low income, but they may just want to be doing some work to make their house something they can age out in and accessible and so forth. And the idea that we're going to prevent them or fine them for taking trees down that are in the way, or a tree that's in the way, I really want to understand what that schedule is going to look like. So is that going to be available to the council?
Chair Krinsman, can I respond? Yeah.
So essentially, what I'll say is that if you look at 2186 A and B, but really 2186A, it talks about the cost, and it is a requirement for the tree warden to set that fee schedule and publish it annually. And that tree schedule is supposed to include the cost to purchase, install, and maintain the tree for the first 5 years. And it's supposed to also include the environmental impact of the replaced trees.
Yeah, that's all really nice language, but I don't know what it means in terms of dollars. And I would
so
assume
the tree warden, it's up to the tree warden to come up with the schedule and publish that every year. So we can ask Mr. Welch, but I would assume sometime probably after the first of the year, we can expect that he will publish the schedule for this year.
So you want us to vote on an ordinance that's going to impose fines on people to remove trees without us knowing what those fines could be?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll be able to share with the council, Mark, I hope I'm not jumping ahead of you here, but I think we'll be able to share with the council where the latest thinking is on the two components that are included in the price. And so Mark has spent a huge amount of time looking at the environmental value and metrics. And the U.S. Forest Service has an iTree tool that's very helpful. And so he has been working with that tool to come up with the environmental value, which goes on top of his normal replacement value, which he's been doing since the beginning of the tree ordinance. So, and updating that every year. So I think Mark will be able to share that. I think, Mark, we're in is it the $400 per inch range? Is that correct?
Yes, correct. That is what it looks like the number will be for this coming year.
For this coming year, and it will be adjusted. And there is a tool, if you're interested in getting into the details of how he did that. I'm sure you'd be happy to publish that or show people his work product on that. So.
Well, I definitely think that the amounts of money need to be, I'm not sure I care so much about what has gone into the number, honestly, because this is not like depleting a rainforest. What we're doing here is we're charging our constituents to take trees off their property that might be in the way of doing a family room or a kitchen addition or something, or, you know, or a ramp. And you know, so you're adding, if it's a 10-inch tree, $4,000, if that's what you're telling me. But I think that has to be on the table and be made very clear.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
yeah, I mean, and
back in the city.
Yep, agreed. And that's what the committee voted on. And Mark has long established mechanism for determining the placement and maintenance cost of a tree, and then we came up with the system for adding on the environmental value. So that added, I don't know, Mark, was that another $120, I think, something like that?
Yeah, I think it was between 120, 125,
Something
somewhere
like that. So, so that was the incremental increase. Let's say Chair Crossley, but Councilor Crossley.
Okay, I just think that needs to be available.
Yeah, no, agreed. And it didn't come up tonight because it's not part of this, but we do think it's important for that to be clear to all the councilors before voting on all of this. So we can put that information in the packet coming up.
All right.
But I mean, we'll just be clear, that's essentially the schedule for the upcoming year. But
Correct.
It's going to change on an annual basis.
2024, yeah, 2024 schedule, yeah.
Okay. President Albright.
So I have a question that the answer might be unknowable, but as you all know, on December 4th at our next meeting, we still have our zoning to work on. And I'm just wondering if anybody plans, that's at least here in this room right now, plans to put this on second call. Does anybody plan to put this on second call?
Yes.
Okay, so would it be acceptable if we postpone this to the last meeting of the year instead of taking it up on December 4th? I can imagine this taking quite a bit of time out of our meeting if we discuss it on this coming Monday.
As long as we did some kind of, well, I wouldn't want it to be chartered.
Yeah.
I was thinking
I think we could.
postponing it to a
Can we-
date.
Postpone it, it's not charterable. It's
Right,
on
we
the
can
floor once.
lay it on the table at the first thing and come back to it on the 18th, but we should vote it out tonight so that it's.
Yeah, no, I'm fine with
Yeah.
that. I was just asking for help from the committee about the intention. So now I hear that it would be on second call, and so I would like to not spend much time on it on the 4th is what
You
I'm
can move
asking.
postponement, Madam
Yes.
President, at
Yes.
the meeting, and then it's not charterable anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, so there you go. Thank you for that.
Councilor Humphrey.
Yeah, so a couple things. First, this is strictly a procedural thing, and Mr. Temple, if you could maybe take a look. I was looking at the two docket language items, and I'm concerned that the final version may have drifted far enough away from the description of 411 that I don't know if it still fits within that, in terms of which one is the one that's the vehicle that we're voting out of committee. So if you want to take a few minutes maybe and get back to us on that, I'm not saying you have to answer this second, but just that I know we need to make sure that whatever it is that gets voted out is consistent with the summary of the docket language. The other point was to Councilor Crossley's concern. So it turned out in discussions previously that the committee had about the fees with the law department that all proposed fee things, including coming from the tree warden, did not meet their interpretation of state law on how the fees have to be structured. So all of those got put to the side, and we did have very extensive discussions on not only how to build the fee, how to make it smooth and understandable and everything else and not wildly erratic, but that even though we weren't voting specific dollars into the ordinance. We did have at various previous meetings a chart in front of us of what the expected anticipated dollars would be based on that formula for the coming year. We don't happen to have them in this particular backup packet because we had already dealt with that. But my suggestion to our committee clerk is, just like we've been having zoning memos and maps and charts and things circulated on our desks for those, when the administration does have the proposed fee schedule ready for the next year, it would probably be good to have that available on the counselors' desks and circulated by email. I'm sure you were already planning to put it somewhere in like a committee report or something like that, but that's sometimes harder to find. So we probably want to just have something that people can look at, again, with the understanding that we're not actually voting on that table of fees, but that it reasonably informs people's votes on the policy. And I think that just having that as a separate kind of breakout document that we can be looking at when this finally does get taken up on the 18th, I think is probably the way to go on that. I personally am comfortable with where we landed on the fees, and I hope that the rest of the committee was as well, just because it was not where anybody started with, including the existing fee formula. So we've got a new formula, new dollar amounts. Not everyone was happy with it. I think it's hard to come up with an appropriate formula, but there is a sort of approximate table that we'll have. So, all right, Mr. Temple, did you get a chance to figure out the answer to my earlier question?
I did, and I don't think it's overly important. I mean, it doesn't match either of them perfectly, but again, that's just docket language, which is the purpose to inform the public of the subject matter of what you're discussing. Obviously, it's the starting point of the discussion, right? And it doesn't need to match where you end up. I do think the final product here falls more within 412.22, but I don't feel strongly either way in terms of which one you want to vote out.
Okay, I'm fine with it being 411. I just didn't know if that was a potential impediment there, and I didn't want us to get into any procedural difficulties because of that. I think it makes more sense, given that, you know, it's the council one that has a lot of the counselors' names on it, to use that as the final thing. But I just wasn't sure if it had moved too far from the summary, but it sounds like it's okay.
No, I'm
then.
okay with it.
So, all right, I'll stick with
Alex
that.
Blair Humphrey has moved approval of 411-22. Any more discussion on that motion? All right, all those in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That is unanimous, 6-0. Councilor Humphrey has also moved no action necessary on 412-22. All those in favor of no action necessary. Any discussion on that? Okay, all those in favor of no action necessary. 6-0. And ladies and gentlemen, Programs and Services has wrapped up its work on the tree ordinance.
Yay.
For now. I would like to add my heartfelt and sincere appreciation, especially to Councilors Norton, Malachy, for raising this, to Deputy Commissioner Welch for all the time you have spent working on this, as well as Attorneys Wilson and Temple. Thank you very much. Mr. Yo, thank you for coming all the nights that you came. And my sincere appreciation to the committee. I love the way we work through things. I think we do good work on this committee. Not every vote goes the way I want. Not every vote goes the way you want, but I think we always have a nice way of deliberating and resolving. So I sincerely appreciate you all, and thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
Great work, all of you.
Good job, everyone. I think with that, we can adjourn. You can go watch the Seahawks beat the Cowboys.
Right.
Good night, everyone.
The Bruins won.
Night.